to the cloud. Okay, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Pleasure to be here, and great to see so many people joining for this session. So greetings from Copenhagen, where it's pretty dark outside. The sun sets before 4 o'clock this time of year. But very much looking forward to this, and I'll share some ideas with you around the future of organization and how to rethink how we manage and lead institutions both in business and government. Before I hope having a conversation with all of you. Just a heads up that I will start out with a very quick question / brainstorm, just to hear where you are in terms of what you dream about when it comes to your organization. So I'll ask you in a moment as I get started, but just so you start thinking about what you would love to see in your own organization in your everyday work. I'll share my screen, and let's see if we can get cracking on this one. Right. So how do we start thinking about the future of organizational design and collaborative decision making is really the headline here. And as I warned you about, what is it actually that we dream about? What could we want in terms of organizational life? Just to give an example, I'll probably return to, but in my organization, when we started our journey on rethinking how we could work together, we wanted to break down the silos. We wanted to have an organization where people could collaborate freely, where they could move to where the important tasks were, where people were able to, you could say, unleash their human capacity more freely without being boxed in by department or fixed teams. But that was our dream, to give an example. My question is, what's your dream? What would you love to see in your own organization? If your organization already is perfect, please write that too in the chat, because if it is, I want to come and study it and learn about what you've done to make it perfect. But if it is a little bit imperfect, if there's something missing, then please let me know. So why don't we in the chat just quickly write whatever you have on your mind, what might be a great improvement of your organization. Let me know, and we'll see what you say. Just for 1 minute or two. Everyone were engaged. Improving society through business technology transformation, improved communication, transparency in decision making, bridging the silos, better alignment, better feedback processes, more insight into what others are working on, end-to-end outcomes, shared ownership of goals, collaborative decision making with partner countries and teams, human-centered, more trust, more user-centered focus, data-informed, cross-department collaboration, more access to leaders in decision making. Take the time that's necessary for collaborative decision. That's great. So I like that one. Unencumbered by procurement rules. Yeah, I like that one too. Excellent. These are all great. And authenticity, less micromanagement. They're all excellent. And we could go on and on. I know that for sure. Of course, we could. So what I want to explore with you is, what are the ways in which we can imagine different ways of organizing and leading? And I'll share with you an experiment that we led at the Danish Design Center, again, a government-funded organization that is probably a little bit radical. And I'm pretty sure I'll provoke you as we go along that story. But let me start another place. So no matter how you look at it, and no matter what your politics are, we're looking at a society in turbulence in many countries and also globally, right? So whether you look at how our environment, our climate, our biodiversity is changing, whether you look at the social infrastructure is changing, whether you look at the future of democracy, whether you look at healthcare, whether you look at mental health, we see a world where there certainly are some challenges. And one way to articulate those challenges, and that's not the only way, and I'm not saying this is the ultimate authority on global challenges or national challenges or even city challenges. The UN Global Goals is that's one example of how we can articulate how we need to work on transformation in society. And many of you coming from government agencies, just looking at everything from the CDC to the GSA and all the other acronyms, are clearly working on some of these issues. And it's getting harder. It seems that it's getting more complex, more turbulent. I know there's a whole series that Innovate US is running now on AI and the implication of AI, both in terms of risks, but also opportunities to provide better services or to problem solve differently. So things are happening. And all of this, even in spite of, you could say, rise of technology and AI, goal number 17 on this list of United Nations global goals, partnership for the goals, the way we partner, the way we collaborate, the way we work together across silos within our organizations, but also across organizations, across sectors. In my mind, that is the most difficult of all the goals. It's also the enabler of all the other ones. It's the way we work together, leveraging technology, leveraging digital, leveraging physical resources, unleashing our capability to solve problems together and be creative together. That is probably the most important of all of them, because that enables everything else. But it's interestingly also maybe the most undervalued and underutilized and underexposed, at least if you move in UN circles or in that kind of circles, but also in everyday organizational life. We focus on the problems, on the tasks, but do we focus so much on how we actually go about them? So I'm circling number 17 here just to say that there's something there that's underappreciated, and maybe especially in the public sector, because we're not exposed in the same way to disruption and to new startups and new entrants and competitiveness and the risk of bankruptcy as you are in the private sector. Now, this is not to say that the private sector necessarily is more innovative than the public sector or that it's better in any way. Not at all, not at all. But we may need to be more intentional about the way we work, because we can get along for quite a long time without being challenged on the way we work. If we are able to move, you could say, under the radar. So what strikes me when I speak with government leaders, both here in Denmark and globally, is that in many ways we all organize the same way. Cities, ministries or departments, institutions, agencies, we are pretty similar, at least across the OECD countries, and actually to a large extent those countries that have been in development for many years and being influenced, of course, in many ways by Western standards of organization and governance. We're quite similar. And you kind of wonder, when we are so creative in technology and so creative in other parts of life, in the arts, for example, in design, how is it that our institutional imagination is so limited that we, in a way, are all using a blueprint of organization that was created by railway companies and the military in the 19th century, refined in the 20th century by the corporates, including corporate America, not least, by business schools, and now in the 21st century, same thing. The other day, I met with a leader at the University of Copenhagen, which is the largest and most prestigious university in Denmark, and they're doing a big reform of how they are organized. And he's a former dean and a professor, and he said, well, the organizational blueprint for how we are now transforming the organizational structure of this university is pretty much how the public sector thought about innovation or organization in 1990. And that's how we now are rethinking organization today. So I want to just challenge all of us that we can do better than that. And not because it's a goal in itself to reorganize or rethink management. The goal must be to do better, right, for society, for whatever challenge or goal we're working on. But as David Graeber and David Wengrow here say in a pretty amazing book called The Dawn of Everything, it's also a pretty ambitious title, The Dawn of Everything. They say that the very essence of our humanity is the fact that we are conscious political actors. and we're capable of embracing a wide range of social arrangements. Now, they're saying this on the back of an analysis of how we humans have organized ourselves since the dawn of humanity. So for the last, just say, roughly 30,000 years, probably more, but we don't have sources going much further back than 30,000 years. And they, in this book, where they study this as an archaeologist and an anthropologist, respectively, they discover that we have been very, very imaginative in how we build cities, in how we changed between being hunter-gatherers and living in urban environments, and how we became farmers, and then we went back to hunter-gathering. So we've been very, very creative in how we organized. And of course, we've also fought each other, we've collaborated, we've built big cities, we've built small communities, and so forth and so on throughout history. But it's as if we've ended our historical trajectory as humanity today by all being the same. And by the way, they argue also getting more and more unequal along the way. What I would say is that enabling collective transition, or to work together on big change, is probably the most urgent challenge we have. And by when I say collective transition, again, I'm using transition a bit like I would use innovation, however, at a bigger scale, right? So how might we transform health systems to really serve people and not anyone else? How might we transform our economy so it's both flourishing and drives growth in good ways, but also is good for our environment and for preserving our planet? How might we collectively move towards a different place? And I think we are at a breaking point or tipping point in some ways around that big question. So the reason why we want to explore and be more imaginative around how we could organize and do things together is to unleash our human potential and collaborate to get to a better place. I mean, that's why we want to do it. It's not for fun, or it's not because it's exciting or meaningful. It could be, but it's because of something bigger than that. Yeah. So around 10 years ago, I was director of MindLab, the Danish government innovation team, and we had a beautiful 4,000 square feet space in the heart of Copenhagen, in the middle of a government building. And I was a public servant, and this was my workspace. It looked like this. Well, it didn't have the flowers every day, but we had the think tank, and we had a lot of funky furniture and cool interiors, and we had a team of about 20 designers and anthropologists working across multiple ministries to bring human-centered design into the heart of government. It was all really cool and fun and meaningful, and we had a good time. But at one point, we also had better coffee than everybody else in the building, because everybody else were like ordinary public servants and we were the special ones. And at one point, we had this French press coffee. You probably know it. So it's like beautiful French press, and I purchased out of my own pocket, but we had a nice coffee grinder. So we had fresh ground coffee, French press coffee, and when we did workshops, we just served this good coffee for people. But somehow our French presses disappeared. They disappeared from our office space, and they were nowhere to be seen. And at one point, we realized we were missing French press, and we needed to get some more. So we went out and bought some on the public purse, on the Ministry of Enterprise and Business budget. And it took about a couple of weeks, but then the head of finance came down to me and said, "Christian, you've just purchased 7 French presses. Why? I mean, I thought you had them already, and they're pretty expensive, and it's good design, and we're spending money on this, and this is the public sector. Why are we doing this?" I said, "Well, they disappeared, and the rumor is that the civil servants are stealing them, and because they have such bad coffee in the rest of the building, that they're taking away our coffee and French presses and using them upstairs in their siloed small cubicles and wherever they're working." And he just got really, really tired and had this look on his face like, "I can't believe this, kindergarten." And then he went back to work and said, whatever you got to do that, I guess. What struck me at the time, but especially now, is that we've somehow built institutions and organizations that not only are built on very old blueprints that may not be fit for purpose in today's world, but we're also not creating flourishing, thriving environments where we really try to serve people. And the fact that maybe we could do with less than design or French presses, but why would we? Because we were running the innovation team and the innovation lab and had all this cool stuff. Why would we be different than the civil servants that every day were designing policies and serving ministers and doing analysis and so forth? And why is it that we are not focusing on creating a whole organization that flourishes? Why do we think that we have to build a small innovation team in a corner that can help everybody else innovate? What would happen if we unleash the creativity and the ability for everyone to do a meaningful collaborative work? That takes more than good coffee. I know that, but I hope you get my point. So, the question is, what is the newest thinking and literature, at least some of it, not all of it, because that would take a while, but some of it say around organizing and managing. And this is the way I've experienced it the last few years, a field that is undergoing its own internal discussion. So if you speak with a random Harvard professor in management, they may not all agree on a perspective that there's a future of management that's quite different than the past. But others will say that we are moving towards, and we have to move towards a very different place. Now, that might go especially for business because they are free to do more or less as they please, but it's actually also increasingly the case for government to begin to explore different ways of organizing that might be a break with the past. And so the question is, what are the academics telling us? So here are a couple of points. So one is that there is this sense that we need to organize differently because the world is changing. Complexity and turbulence and the need to be so-called agile, which basically means just to experiment fast and learn fast. That's kind of what we mean by agility. So innovate, which means coming up with better ideas, new ideas, implementing them to create value. Sustainability, which means thinking holistically around both economy and climate and environment and social thriving at the same time. It's also called ESG. Balancing long-term thinking and being able to carve out time to think for the long term, which I think is an imperative if you work in government, is because government is here for a long time. We're not in a short-term game of just building a startup and getting purchased or getting acquired. But what we're doing is we're building long-term impact and change. So we need to be able to think in foresight and scenarios and long-term change. But we also need to make fast decisions when a crisis hits or when a minister calls on us and so forth, or a mayor needs our help. So how do we do that in a meaningful, effective way? How do we attract and retain and nurture talent? It's not a new idea that we need to understand what it takes to attract talent in an organization where we may not be able to pay the same as in the private sector. I recently, just before I left the Danish Design Center, I lost a very, very good colleague with a background in design to the private sector, and they paid him 50% more a month than we could. And we already paid him quite well. So there's no way you can compete with that. And he had small kids and he had a family and he was like, I have to do this. So how do you attract, retain, and nurture talent, at least to the extent you can do that by creating a meaningful, collaborative, thriving, attractive work environment? And of course, paying people as well as you meaningfully can, given that you probably cannot ultimately compete with at least the best paying private organizations. And the bottom line of this, and these books that I'm sharing here, I'll get a little bit more detail on a few of them if you want, but it's about building organizations that unleash the full creative potential of people. Not just creative potential, but potential in all kinds of ways, right? The barriers to innovation are many, and the barriers to change. And as you see, point number one here is collaboration. And these points here are actually coming from private business. We did a project a few years ago in 2019 with large corporates and asked them what's holding you back when it comes to innovation. And maybe you can't say yes to all of these, but I'm assuming and thinking that you probably will recognize quite a few of them. And these are barriers to innovation and change in very large corporate organizations, in finance, in pharmaceuticals, in insurance, in manufacturing, actually in Japan and Denmark that we worked with. And I haven't shown this slide to very many in large organizations that couldn't recognize a few of those points. So things are holding us back. At the same time, we have this world of opportunity. A workforce has never been better educated, at least in many countries. We have people who are ready to take responsibility. I know we've had a great resignation and quiet quitting and all those items after COVID-19. But we also know that under the right conditions, we can see there are organizations that can thrive and can be incredibly innovative. We know that there are these models out there, some of the books I just shared with you, but also others that are demonstrating innovative ways of organizing. We have technology that's unprecedented, and now we have AI coming into the mix, which you'll learn more about in this series. And finally, we already tend to be forgetting that COVID-19 showed us how quickly we can change and adapt. I'm not saying that was fun or nice or pleasant in any way, and we have to take seriously the damage that that period did to us, both in terms of health and honestly casualties, but also disrupting our societies in many different ways that we probably still don't understand. But it also showed us that, for instance, we can work at a distance in many cases. We can find new ways to be more safe and more healthy at work, even though if we have to turn up at work. We can find ways of creating new physical spaces that are supportive of modern work. We can leverage technology in new ways, and we can do it very, very quickly because we have to. And we need to take that learning and those lessons with us in the best positive ways we can. One of the books that I find particularly interesting, and again, this is a backdrop to what I'll share with you in terms of a case example of radical design and organizational change, is this one called Humankind, which is important because if you dive deep enough, you'll understand that we have built the organizations we have today out of fear, out of the need to contain and control risk. And we built the organizations we have today, in many cases, because we think that people will probably do harm or do stupid things or do mistakes or do bad things if we don't control them. So fundamentally, and I'm putting this in a slightly, let's put it slightly simple way, but in many ways, we've built organizations out of the premise that people probably left to their own devices are kind of bad. And as one, she was a global director of human resources in an organization, said to me at one point, she said, yes, well, actually, in human resource departments, we know that most people aren't bad, but we are designing our policies, our systems, and our metrics because of the 1% that really are. The 1% that will, take from the corporate purse or will not do their work at all, or maybe in some places it's maybe 5 or 10%, but at least it's not the majority by any means. And what I'll challenge you around today is basically what would happen if we build organizations around a premise that is that people are mostly good, and certainly mostly want to do good. It doesn't mean that people don't make mistakes. It also doesn't mean that there isn't evil in the world or there aren't psychopaths in the world, but it means that all other things being equal, most people actually are good. And left to their own devices, they will try to be good. So this one book, Reinventing Organizations, it's become a classic in organizational design by Frederic Laloux, says we used to live in the dark ages of chaos and power and fear. Think of the mafia, or think of street gangs, but also think of what the philosopher Hobbes would say is sort of the rise of humanity, right, in a world of chaos and a world where life was nasty, brutish, and short, not least. Then we've discovered government, we discovered hierarchy, stability, control. We actually discovered bureaucracy, and the yellow type of organizations are organizations that are characterized by that kind of classic blueprint, right? Then we discovered the corporation, we discovered innovation, we discovered meritocracy, and we actually built that into the public sector in a big way as well. Those of you who might remember that there was once upon a time a movement called the New Public Management, not so new anymore, but heavily inspired by this red circle of ideas around organization and management, right? It came in a big way throughout the late 70s and the 80s and 90s, and it's actually still with us today. Make government work like companies, reinvent government, like Al Gore was actually saying back in the 1990s, and Osborne and Graeber, a couple of authors were saying. Then we had delighting customers, shared values, also in government, by the way. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, as the late Peter Drucker would say. Empowering employees, getting stakeholders engaged in a bigger way, which government always has had to do. This is a private sector point, I guess, mostly. And then finally, today, Lalou would say, today, in an advanced version of sort of enlightenment, we humans need to understand to work together for a higher purpose, for distributed decision making, collaboration, breaking down the silos and hierarchies, working for wholeness. And he mentions that you can see an American company based in California called Patagonia, Morningstar, another American company, Boortzak, a Dutch company, which is public sector funded. It's a nursing organization of 15,000 people working in nursing. As examples and case examples of those that have embraced this teal type of management, right? Where one key is self-management, which means that people govern themselves rather than having a manager or boss telling them what to do. And that's especially one of the things that these organizations are characterized with. It doesn't mean they don't have a hierarchy. Most of these organizations do have hierarchy to some extent, but much less than we normally would see. Old power versus new power. I showed you a book. It kind of goes without explanation, right? That there was once upon a time when one of the most valuable hotel chains was the Hilton. It's still doing quite well, I should say. But Airbnb is bigger in scale, and it's a totally different model. It's a distributed model where it's a platform-based economy, right? Some of the case examples that are thrown around in the world of the future of organization are some of these. Boortzak from Netherlands, that's government. Another one that's government is the United States Special Operations. A great book called Teams by Stanley McChrystal, showing how efficient military organization is actually distributed and collaborative and decentralized. So just a few examples of what are the cases that we see around the world that are highlighted as examples of more distributed decision-making collaboration. And what's interesting with some of them, you might know a small American media company called Netflix. What's interesting is that they're able to reinvent themselves as they have to. Now, I'm not saying that government needs to reinvent itself that often, but it just strikes me that with Netflix, for instance, and they've actually reinvented themselves about 4 times by now within a span of around 20 years, right? So first starting out with sending DVDs and laser discs to people by mail. Then they discovered there might be something called streaming. So shifting with when the technology was ready to streaming. Third phase was discovering that maybe they should make content for the streaming. So now they produce series and films. And the 4th generation of Netflix, which is happening right now, is going into computer games. And so the ability to reinvent yourself and stay ahead of a market and remain relevant in a market that's now become quite competitive, for example, in streaming and also TV production, it's pretty interesting. You know, how could they do that? I mean, Kodak couldn't do it. Blockbuster couldn't kind of do it, but they did. And then when you ask them, they say, well, because we're experimenting all the time. It's trial and error. They would say words like agile or innovative or experimental or design driven or whatever, but that's kind of what they're doing. So now to the case example. So at the Danish Design Center, we looked at all this, and we were an organization that were about 40 people, so very small. But some of these case examples are quite large, right? I mentioned tens of thousands of people. So we're kind of inspired by these examples, and we would get curious about this question of what do you believe about people? Namely, what would happen if we fundamentally believed that people were good? I mean, our colleagues are good. That's why we hired them. But pretty much everyone else want to be good. And so what would that kind of worldview mean? And then we fell across a couple of fun examples that kind of puts this at the edge. I don't know if any of you know this film or the book, but it's called Lord of the Flies. And Lord of the Flies is both a Nobel winning literature, right? Nobel Prize winner. It's also a blockbuster film. And it's about, for those of you, and not all of you will probably know it, so I'll just say very, very briefly, it's basically about a group of boys that are flying across the world because of some crisis or war. The plane, just with the boys, crashes on a remote island, and these young boys are left to their own devices for quite a long time. And the question is, as William Golding, the author, asks, what happens when young boys are left to their own devices without adult supervision, i.e., without civilization? And this image kind of explains everything. They degenerate into something pretty bad, and they end up killing each other. So that's what happens to humans if we don't control them, basically. Story number 2. Remember, that book is fiction. It was fiction. It was just a story. But of course, on the back of World War II and written in the 50s, there was a good reason maybe to say that humanity is kind of nasty if we are left to our own devices. This story is of the Tongan castaways, which is basically a group of young kids. And this, by the way, the story doesn't validate the worldview that people are only good fully, because these kids lived in Tonga and they stole a boat because they were bored in school. So that's not so good. But they stole the boat, went out, went into a storm, got lost, stranded on a remote island where they're lost for 2 years. And an Australian captain comes by 2 years later, finds them, saves them, and they're all alive. They've all found food. When one of them broke his leg falling down a cliff, they picked him up and fixed his leg as best they could. And they're all fine. Now, did they have fun? Not so much. As I said, we all missed our moms. But they came back. Oh, and by the way, when they came back, they went straight to their families and then to prison because they stole the boat. And then the captain of the book, he sold the rights to the story to Western media. And for the money he got from selling the media rights, he bailed them out of prison. Beautiful story in the sense that they actually were friends until his death recently. So just to say, 2 different stories about human nature. So what we did at the Danish Design Center was we said, we believe in the second story. It's a choice you make. You can discuss the science, I'm sure. The book Humankind says a lot about it. But we said basically, when we were doing a new strategy, you can read the Danish part of this, but it says Design for Sustainable Growth. We said, can we realize our new ambitions, a new ambitious strategy with this organization that we have? And we had an organization that would probably look like yours. We had team leaders or departments where bosses and managers had control of people, and they could pretty much hire and fire people. They had a control of and a responsibility for finances and so forth. But we had these great people in this organization, and we said, how could we redesign our organization if we truly believed that people were good? If we truly believed, if we truly believed that that we could do things differently. So to the question, do we have the right organization to drive sustainable growth, to drive transformation in society? The answer was no, we do not have the right organization. We do not have the collaboration we want. We actually talked about how we were trading people between departments, because working in silos is one thing, but trying to run projects across silos is another one. So we're spending a lot of time debating among a team of managers who could get which staff, who could get which resource. And we were trading people as if they were, I don't know, not people. And we said, this is just not sustainable. We don't want to do it this way. We don't want to spend our time trading people. We want an organization where people move to where the work is. We want to have an organization where people move to where there's meaningful stuff to do on their own, because they are adults. They're not children. I mean, we've hired adults. Why are we sitting here in a closed room as managers and deciding over them? So we said, no, the organization is not fit. So we said, we want the following: a liberated organization where people can actually realize our strategy and do it together, to collaborate. We want a healthy organization where people, they thrive mentally and they can grow professionally. We want also to be efficient and innovative. We want to be efficient because we're spending public money, and we want to be innovative because we want to make great value and always think about more value creation. That's what we wanted. So to do so, we made a manifesto that said, this is what we believe in people. They thrive when they're recognized, they grow when they have influence, they want to make a difference, they will take responsibility, and they both can lead and can follow others. The last one is a little bit contentious in the sense that, can everybody be a leader? I would say yes, with the right training. maybe not necessarily just naturally, but everybody has the ability, a possibility to lead. And I would also say that you cannot lead without followership. So finding out whether somebody's a leader, just look behind them and see if anybody is following. If nobody is following, it's not a leader. It might be a manager, but not a leader. So these assumptions, what we decided, would drive our decisions around organizational structure. And this is the way we then organized. Everyone chooses their own leader because you can only be a leader with followers. Everyone, this was not year one, but year two, we said everyone can offer their leadership to others, which means that anyone can say, I would like to be available to be your coach, to be your sparring partner, to be your mentor, whatever role you need, I'm available. Does anybody want to work with me on that? So that's what we did. We said everybody freely choose where to move, in which professional area, and could also choose more than one area of work. For example, somebody would work on climate change and circular economy. Others would work on digitization, which, by the way, might go hand in hand in some ways. No fixed departments or teams, so no more managers who could be bosses of other people and decide over them. And we wanted to eradicate as many procedures, systems, and policies as possible. Now, being funded by the state, by government, means that you cannot get rid of everything. And there are processes and approaches and tools you must use. And that's okay, because that's a big game to change, like government procurement or other pieces. But we could change the things that we were in control of, and we did. As one example, when the Ministry of Business sent out a letter to everybody in their agencies, including us, that during COVID, they asked us to do a check whether employees went to work without a valid COVID certificate, test certificate, basically to test if they were cheating and to test colleagues randomly if they were going to work on purpose sick. And we said, we can't do that because we believe that people are fundamentally good and that no responsible colleague would go to work knowingly being sick with COVID and potentially killing their colleagues. So we basically kindly declined to follow that procedure, and we got away with that. Now, there could be other things we couldn't have done, but this one we did. And most people I talk with in Danish government did not do that. But we had to do it because otherwise we were not living up to the premise that we just decided. Tasks defined not by position or but by role. And working with roles means that you break up a hierarchy and say, what's the work you're doing? So my job was being a CEO or head of the institution. But I was also sometimes a coach to people. Sometimes I was a speaker. Sometimes I was a trainer. Sometimes I was a facilitator. So my roles were very different. Sometimes I had to manage a board meeting with our board of directors. Now, then I'm a CEO, right? So there are different roles, and being aware of that and being flexible around that means you can unleash much more potential in people. And then comes, of course, the big question around decision making. And I'll just spend a moment on this. Because in hierarchical organizations, we make decisions from position, right? And we can tell people to do things because we say so, if you're a manager. And your manager will say to you to do stuff because they say so, because they are over you and have more authority, right? Now, if you take that away, you still have to make decisions. But instead of doing it through hierarchy and through position, you do it in process or in consultation. What does that mean? It means you have to talk with people. Let me give you an example. At one point, a colleague says to me, I want to hire a new colleague and because I need that resource. I need a new resource, a new person. And I say, well, that's fine. That's your choice. You can decide that. In this organization, that's your decision, not mine. But of course, you have to consult and you have to seek advice on that decision before you make it. And she said, so what does that then mean? What does that mean? Who should I speak with? And I said, well, a couple of things. One is you have to make transparent to everyone that this is a process now of decision making that's happening. So it has to be transparent to everybody in the organization that you are considering a new hire. Secondly, one of the first people you might want to talk to could be the head of finance, because this might cost us money hiring a new person. maybe, and this is not me designing this, but you could think about talking with other colleagues who could use that person you want to hire for their work as well. So a consultation around what skills and competencies do we need. Okay, that sounds good. I'll do that. She did that. 2 weeks later, she comes back to everyone and says, I've done my advisory process. This is what I've found. I still think it's a good idea. This is the funding needed. We have this budget next year. We actually have the money. Our head of finance says so. I'm going to go ahead. Any objections? And then people could ask questions and they could come with objections and qualify the decision. And what this ultimately means is that what we're doing in terms of decision making is we're moving from a bureaucracy to a meritocracy. A meritocracy where the good argument wins, where knowledge wins, insight wins. Those that are closest to the problem, they are the ones making decisions, not those that are furthest away. It strikes me that in many organizations, those that make the biggest decisions are the ones that know the least and are the furthest away from the practicalities of the work. So that's what we did. And we implemented this. It was the fall of 2020. So it's about 3.5 years ago. And we did it when we first said we're going to do this. We launched it at a collaborative workshop with all colleagues. And we said, we're implementing this 2 weeks from now. And people were excited. Remember, these are highly educated, smart people who work for meaningful change, work with creativity, work with design. But then somebody said, within about half an hour of launching this organization, okay, so if I'm going to choose my own leader now, who do I then negotiate my salary with? And there was a question posed to my deputy director, Sune, that I wrote this book with. And fundamentally, he answered, I don't know that, but let's find out together. And that sentence is a sentence that we ended up saying quite a few times the next 3 years. Because whenever something pops up in an organization where we don't have the answer, don't fully have the answer, my experience at least is that a lot of managers will pretend they have it anyway. And because they want to look smart and they want to be in control and they want to be in the hierarchy above other people. And so they'll come up with a decision, or they'll invite a few people into a closed room, close the door, discuss with other managers, and then come back with a decision to implement. But what we did was something different. We said, mostly, we don't know. We don't have the answer to that, but we have to find out. Somebody also said, how are we even going to settle salaries? I mean, are we going to have a different salary model now that we are this organization? What does a salary model or pay model look like in a human liberated organization? We don't know. Let's find out together. And finding out together means that we created so-called circles or teams of people that would do development projects to discover this. What are examples of that? Now, one of the things we dreamed about in our organization was the freedom to really build really innovative, complex missions and projects, and we did that, and it happened in many ways at an unprecedented level. Just give one example, some of our colleagues built a long-term partnership with a philanthropic foundation to drive circular economy for Denmark, and they got $20 million in funding for it over a 7-year period, which was unprecedented in terms of scale and length for us. We also started doing joint budget planning processes, which meant that everyone were involved in planning our budget for the next year in a collaborative workshop, something we never did before, which meant that people finally understood our budget and had qualitative input to it. We rethought recruitment in ways where we started saying we want to recruit human beings, not CVs, or people, not resources. Which is kind of challenging if you have an HR department, which we didn't, and I don't think we usually maybe necessarily need to have one, but at least, and I know these departments are often called people and culture today, by the way, but rethinking recruitment meant that we would meet potential hires in a cafe in town to see how they perform in a natural environment and be human with them. Or we would, instead of giving them a fictional case, would take them to work and have them work with us for half a day or a day. So really trying to rethink, what does human recruitment look like? Or enabling a 4-day work week, which is something we didn't get to while I was there, but where some colleagues said, could we be so productive that we could be paid fully for 5 days of work, but only do 4 days of work? What would it take? And started our experimentations with that in terms of more productive ways of holding meetings, productive ways of having email-free time, productive ways of having meeting-free time, and so forth. Transparent salaries. Somebody said, well, let me see what happens if I share my salary with everybody else on our intranet and see what happens. And he said, this is my salary. I'm kind of wondering what's yours. And within 24 hours, everybody shared what the salary was. And then suddenly we had a transparent salary model, not by design, but by bottom-up sharing. I volunteered pretty quickly too, because I thought, I have to share mine as well. And that raises, of course, new questions about inequality or pay levels and so on. But if you have a trusted environment, you can do that. And next step, of course, was to start rethinking how might we set salaries in different ways, including, and this will maybe provoke a few of you, including a model where you can decide your own pay raise, where people can decide their pay. Now, following government rules, by the way, which means government levels of salary. Now, how's that possible? Well, it's possible if you make it transparent and you have an advisory process and everybody can see why you're doing it, and everybody can have their say in whether it's a good idea or not until you then can make your decision. Turns out that organizations that have where colleagues can set their own salary tend to have lower salaries than organizations that don't do it. Anyway, there was another consequence of this. And finally, we at one point had to make redundancies. We were making a big strategic shift. We needed to get rid of at least one full-time employee in the following year. And we said, how do we do that? Because we can't just run around firing people based on some kind of KPIs or metrics. We have to do it differently. And colleagues said, well, we're not going to let the senior management fire anyone, but we'll be happy to design a model for how we might reduce employment costs. And one of the ideas was to have voluntary redundancies so that people could voluntarily leave, which turned out that we actually had more people leaving than we needed, which was in many ways actually a good thing. And it was done in a very, very organic and dignified way, where we were all celebrating that they were moving on to their different jobs. Maybe they would return someday. But often making redundancies in organizations is full of bias, and certainly full of stigma and full of shame. And here it was just a very organic and very beautiful process, actually. So conclusion, lots of value, but also some challenges. And I'm not going to say to you that in this journey we had for 3 years of this kind of radical organizational change and only about 40 people, right? Who has my back when things get tough? Because normally I can push stuff to the manager and they solve problems for me. So who takes over when I can't deal with things? So there's a lot of psychological unsafety in the beginning. What turned out in the organization was that actually everybody has your back, because now we are colleagues that are collaborating together, and we don't need to push stuff to an adult. We are also adults, and we can actually have the tough conversation with each other, and we can also support each other in those conversations. Critical decisions, including hiring and firing, we could actually do together. Thriving. Ultimately, when we measured, and we did this also in a quantitative survey, people were generally quite satisfied and had a quite high job satisfaction and motivation, but in periods it was difficult, and with the uncertainty of what does this really mean to me. And then finally, speed. Yeah, decisions might slow down when you have to consult people rather than just closing a door or just making a choice. But what's interesting is that you actually get better implementation when you make decisions together, because having an advisory process means that you fold all the knowledge, all the insights into the decision, and it's transparent, so everybody's potentially taking part in it. So when you decide something, it's already implemented. Think about that for a moment. There's no change management. There's no implementing or rolling out. It's done because you've actually worked together on making the implementation already, yeah? And leadership roles, well, let me put it this way. My role became, I got a lot less to do in terms of classic management, but I was also freed up as a leader to spend time with colleagues, to coach them and to share my knowledge and spend more time with our partners and external collaborators, even write a book and so forth. So the role of, let's just call it senior management, also changes. And in some ways, it's a loss of identity. It's a loss of control, but I would also say it's a positive loss of control. So we've written some articles. You can find them on the Danish Design Center's website, and you get all these slides, of course, as part of this course. But here are some of the articles we wrote along the way. And article number 3 is, by the way, written by colleagues, not by me or my co-director. They basically said we are now more of an organism than an organization. We are emerging in different ways. We're not the same anymore. And this is meant in a quite positive way. One last word on tools, because you might wonder how do I get started on this? And so just very quickly, and you get the slides again, so I'm not going to dive into it too much, but what might be first steps? And I'll say this is part of the book. It'll come out in English, I hope next year. So you look at that as well. But it has a very short title. The organization was set free. Our leadership had to be rediscovered. We have to think about a more succinct title, I think, for the English version. But one thing is thinking about organization, thinking about where you start, right? We started with everything, but you might want to start with something less than that, your strategy, your structure, your competencies. That's one, diving in. Another one is asking yourself, as we just did a moment ago or an hour ago, what organization do I dream of? Starting out together, not just in a closed room, but starting out together with asking, what do we dream of? What's the picture of the preferred future? And it can be a bit abstract. It can also be very concrete, but asking that question. And then asking, instead of necessarily going as we did, pretty massively in, maybe saying, what's the one thing we could change that would start us moving in that direction? One thing that we're not doing today, we could do differently. And so here's a simple tool that you might use for that, right? So to the left, you ask yourself, why are we here? What value are we creating in the world? And I'm not suggesting that given the mandate you have as an agency or a city or a ministry or a department or an institution, you throw that away. You probably still need to create the value even better in the future than you do today, okay? So that's one big question. We need to create this value. Serve unemployed people, serve people that are with healthcare, serve people in climate, whatever it might be. And we also have to ask ourselves, what do we believe in people? And if you believe that people are fundamentally evil and bad and should be controlled, then maybe this is not for you. But if you do have a slightly positive human view, then you might articulate that in some ways, or at least revisit what you think about your colleagues. And then the preferred future, where do we want to go? What do we imagine? What do we dream of? What's the potential? And then building at least just one hypothesis. What if we did this different? What if we did this one thing differently? And then trying it out through action. Action, deciding how to measure the action, analyze the results, learn from it. So for instance, when our colleagues did a small experiment with new ways of meeting every Monday to declutter your inbox from the last week, just for an hour and a half, they said, what's the documentation that works? Well, it's interviewing people about how does it free up time for other things? How does it make their work life easier? How does it make the Monday a better day? How many emails did they get rid of? How much less stress did they experience, and so forth? There are different creative ways of doing that, right? What's the learning? And then ultimately scaling that, sharing that to a new practice. And then moving back to the next hypothesis that you might try. So this is just one model, very simple, very straightforward. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's one way you might go about it at a more incremental level. This is just a way to share it in human language, like what are the things that you might ask yourself, or the statements you might use to drive the change. So this is just to give you a little bit of a simple tool you might try out at home. And you might want to think that this is all about challenging your assumptions, navigating the change, rehearsing the future, as I always say, testing out, trying things out. This was my story. Don't doubt that people can change the world. That's what changes the world. It's people. Maybe one day it might be AI. I hope not, but so far it's us. So thanks for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Christian. That was fantastic. And I really appreciate how much engagement we've had throughout the workshop in the chat, and how many great questions people have asked. I'm just going to stop the recording from